Today on Know the Truth, Philip DeCourcy is talking about running to win.
When you set out to do something in life, understand that part of getting to the finish line and the hoopla that comes with the victory, part of getting there is putting up with frustration along the way. We don't need to feel guilty as God's people to take a time out, to rest up. In fact, Spurgeon once said, sometimes the most spiritual thing you and I can do is sleep.
As we watch an Olympian push through the last lap of his race, sometimes we find ourselves yelling, "Don't quit. You're almost there. You can do it." Well, in the same way, God is cheering us on. And today on Know the Truth, Philip DeCourcy uses that same imagery because Philip says success is nearest when discouragement is greatest. It's possible you're feeling a little weary today, wondering if you can finish the race. Let's learn from Nehemiah's example. Today's message is titled, Down But Not Out.
In 1952, young Florence Chadwick stepped into the waters of the Pacific Ocean off Catalina Island. It was her intention to swim to the shore of mainland California. She was the first woman up until this point who had swum the English Channel both ways. That morning, the weather was foggy, the water was chilly. She was 15 hours into her swim when her muscles began to cramp, her will began to give way, and she called on the little flotilla of boats that were coming alongside her for support and safety. She called upon them to bring her aboard. She felt she couldn't go one stroke further. Her mother, who was on board one of the little boats, encouraged her to keep going because she felt that the shore wasn't that far away. But Florence Chadwick had had enough, and so they pulled her onto the boat. And it wasn't until she was on the boat that she discovered that she was less than half a mile from the shore. Can you imagine the disappointment? 15 hours into it, half a mile to go. She gives up, she gives out. In fact, the next day at the news conference, she said this, quote, "All I could see was the fog. I think if I had have seen the shore, I could have done it." Folks, the story of Florence Chadwick is a reminder of the clear and present danger of you and I giving up and giving out before the goal has ever been reached. Of throwing in the towel before the bell. Of losing our way amidst the fog of disappointment and discouragement. Or forgetting, and this is often true in life, that success is nearest when discouragement is greatest. I want to write that down. Florence Chadwick found that to be true. We're going to see in Nehemiah 4 that the people of God found that to be true also. That success is nearest often when the discouragement is greatest. And as we dive into the context and the content of Nehemiah 4, we're going to find the people of God floundering and splashing amidst a fog of increasing negative emotions. What they had started out with such enthusiasm now seemed to be a pipe dream. That which they had reached for now seemed to be on their reach. And so as we come into Nehemiah chapter 4, we're going to see Nehemiah in terms of his leadership deal with the threat of discouragement and despair among the people of God. And we're going to see the people of God grapple amidst the fog of negative emotions. And we're going to see them regain their balance, regain their vision. We're going to see their enthusiasm and their endeavor given back to them. And you and I will want to follow them in this process because at some point, we're all going to deal with discouragement. We're all going to feel the threat and the temptation to give up and give out in our marriage, in our ministry. And so there's many lessons to be learned. And the first lesson is to learn you will have to deal with discouragement. Life isn't all peaches and cream. There are hills to be climbed. There are battles to be fought. There are fogs to be dealt with. You'll never win through to victory if you don't know how to deal with discouragement along the way, because setbacks will come. Critics' corner will grow. Your strength will give out. You'll wonder why you ever started in the first place. The fear of failure will stalk you. Your emotions will cloud your vision. People will doubt you. You will begin to doubt yourself, and you'll even begin to doubt God. Nehemiah 4 helps us deal with discouragement, helps us come to terms and become victorious in the midst of such a threat and such a temptation. Because here in Nehemiah 4, Nehemiah has to minister some CPR on the failing hearts of the people of God. They're discouraged. Look at verse 10 as an example of what we're talking about. Here's what Judah said: the strength of the laborers is failing. There's so much rubbish, so much still to do, so much that's undone. And they were coming to the conclusion that they were not able to build the wall. That which they had started out to do with such enthusiasm, now they felt they were falling short of that goal, and they would probably never see the realization of that dream. Have you been there? Are you there? In the midst of the rubble? When everything seems to be more than it really is? They were increasingly nervous and fearful also because their enemies were tightening the noose. They were conspiring, verse 8, to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. And that was well known to them. In fact, the Jews that lived nearest to the enemies heard this, and they came to the citizens of Jerusalem and told them time and time and time again, you know what, we're done for. The game's up. Oh, we've got halfway there, but Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, they've got it in for us. And you know what? It's time to hang up our boots. It's time to throw in the towel. And Nehemiah says, not just so quick. And he exercises great leadership here. We may be knocked down, he says, but we're not knocked out. Remember God, great and awesome. Now, I want to see the contributing factors to their discouragement. It'll take us a week or two to get to the contributing factors to their encouragement. But in some ways, a diagnosis is the beginning of a prognosis. And so as we identify their problems, I think we'll learn some positive lessons. So we'll begin to look at the reasons for their discouragement. And time after that, we'll look at the resources for their encouragement. In fact, there are 4 contributing factors to their discouragement. There are a number of factors at work that are eroding their encouragement and their enthusiasm, clouding their judgment to the possible completion of the work. Things had got off to a bang, but now they were beginning to lose heart. They needed a second wind in this endeavor to rebuild the walls of the city. I've never ran a marathon, never intend to. I don't mind people running vicariously for me, but I will never run a marathon. But I'm told somewhere in the race, beyond the halfway mark, the runner hits the proverbial wall. It's not a literal wall, it's a psychological wall, it's an emotional wall. Their muscles now are strained and aching, and every nerve end in their bodies cries and screams, enough! No more! And they have to push through that proverbial wall. And I think what's true of a marathon is true of ministry, is true of marriage, is true of life. If you and I set out to do something and we want to get to the finish line, be aware of the fact that you and I will have to deal with discouragement, with naysayers, with our own doubts. We'll have to push through the wall to build a wall. And that's what's going on here in Nehemiah 4. And they were up against a number of things that were contributing. Let's identify the first one, the feeling of fatigue. When you feel like giving up, there's a real possibility that contributing to that discouragement and that downturn is a sense of fatigue. We're told that in verse 10. The decline in morale, the decline in productivity was due to the failing strength of the workers. Look at verse 10. Then Judah said, the strength of the laborers is failing. That's the first problem here, fatigue. In fact, the verb here, feeling, is a word in the Hebrew that means to stumble, to totter. It's the picture of a man or a woman, and the greater the weight, the knees begin to buckle. They begin to kind of stumble and totter. And they started out with this burden. They have expended energy, and now they don't have as much resources to fight the fatigue and the burdens, and so they begin to kind of get weak at the knees, begin to buckle and bend. They've already built the wall halfway up, and they've expended themselves. That was no easy task. In fact, in this very chapter, in verse 19, we're told that the work was great and extensive. This wasn't a breeze. This was a difficult task that they had sought to undertake. In fact, back in chapter 2 and verse 14, we read that Nehemiah, remember when he initially went out to survey the damage and to make an assessment and to put together a feasibility plan, he had to get off his animal because the rubble and the stones were so big and so many. So imagine the scene. These people, you know what? They set their hands to do the work. They're rallied, they're roused, and they set about it. And within perhaps a month, would be maybe our best guess, half the wall's up. But there's still a ton of work to do. But you know what? By now, they don't have the reserves that they had when they started out. And I just think it's important for you and I to recognize the fact that when we're challenged to give up and give in, be aware that fatigue may be contributing to that. The problem may be not as big as you think it is, or the victory may be nearer than you anticipate. And perhaps you need simply to rest and refocus. Because exhaustion is an enemy, and it is an ally to our enemies. Think about that. Exhaustion is an enemy and an ally to our enemies, because when we're tired and when our nerves are jangled and we're under pressure, when we forfeit rest and nutrition, we are prime candidates for discouragement and depression. It's during those times of restlessness that we become tense and irritable and gloomy. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. You've heard that before, and the Bible endorses that reality. They're becoming fearful because they're fatigued. The strength of the laborers was failing, tottering. And I think it's important for you and I to recognize that. I'm not saying that you and I can avoid tiredness. We can't. Life is an exhausting business. Building a marriage takes a lot of work. Raising children is exhausting. Doing the service of the Lord can sometimes be toilsome. In fact, look what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 11 of his own apostolic ministry. 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 27. Here's what he says: in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often. If you're going to serve the Lord, if you're going to, leave a legacy in life, it's going to involve weariness and toil and sleeplessness. It's hard to avoid being fatigued. In fact, Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer, worked so hard during the time of the Reformation that he fell into bed, not even taking time to change his sheets for a whole year. You'd be glad to know, ladies, he was single at the time. Sometime later, he would marry a beautiful young nun by the name of Catherine, and I'm sure she changed his sheets for him. But for a time, he would just roll into bed and roll out of bed. In fact, you'll read in Nehemiah chapter 4 here, towards the end, so neither I, my brethren, or my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me took off our clothes except to get them washed. Sometimes life has us with our nose to the grinding stone. And you know what? There's no avoiding that. In fact, the church across the world has moved forward by tired saints of God. But what we need to do is recognize the danger of fatigue and make sure that we rest and rebound for those times when the weight is heavier and the burden is greater. Because if we don't, physical exhaustion will alter our emotional state. We're a whole person. And so when you and I get exhausted in the body, it often alters our ability to think straight, to be strong and resolved in our will and in our minds. And so it's important that you and I recognize, first of all, that the feeling of fatigue contributed to their sense of discouragement. Jesus said, didn't he, to his own disciples in Mark 6:30-32, come apart and rest a while. We don't need to feel guilty as God's people to take a time out, to rest up. Because we'll be more effective servants of Christ. We'll be more effective fathers and mothers after that getaway, that weekend, to just remind ourselves of what's important in life, to sleep in a little bit. In fact, Spurgeon once said, sometimes the most spiritual thing you and I can do is sleep. Remember how God put Elijah to sleep? What a ministry, what a mercy. Sometimes our dark moods are nothing more than physical and emotional depletion. We over-adrenalize our bodies, giving them no chance to recover. We give ourselves no margins to adjust. And then we become a victim to negative emotions, to gloomy thoughts. And we become within the reach of discouragement and despair. And so we need to bear that in mind. Take an inventory of your life at the moment. Are you guarding your nutrition, your rest, your sleep? It will help you to be strong and effective in rebuilding your future and in constructing your life. So bear that in mind. I think that's a contributing factor and something that you and I need to take on board. Like the story of the stranded teenage motorist girl who sat by the side of the road with the hood of the car up. It had ground to a halt. She didn't know what was going on. She knew nothing about cars. She was only a few months into her temps, and she had a limited knowledge. And then a good Samaritan pulled up beside her, and lo and behold, the guy himself had a background in mechanics, and so he fiddled and he poked, and after a while, he stuck his head from around the hood, and he said, you know what? You're out of gas. She looked at him and then thought about what her father would think of all of this and replied, will it hurt to drive it home like that? Sorry, ladies. The feeling of fatigue. You and I can sometimes be operating on an empty tank. And we go nowhere. And the enemy catches up with us. And we become discouraged. Here's the second thought. What I call the feeling of frustration. And you'll be interested to see where we go with this. What I call the feeling of frustration. Let's go back to verse 10. Judah said to Nehemiah, the strength of the laborers is failing. That's their fatigue. And there is so much rubbish. Do you sense his frustration? Do you sense the people's discouragement at the thought, you know what, here we are halfway, we've built the walls up to half their height, but just look around you, there's still so much rubbish, still so much rubble that's got to be removed. And they get discouraged. We've already identified, I'm sure, they were huge stones to be moved. The work was great. I mean, these were no small stones. These were boulders that built up a city's walls, fortified it against an attacking army. And it was extensive. This was a fairly large city. The excitement of those early days had given way to exasperation. I mean, they had a mind to work according to verse 6, and now they were losing their mind. They were frustrated, discouraged. Perhaps they thought to themselves, you know what? We bought into Nehemiah's vision, but you know what? If you think about it, it wasn't realistic. You know, who are we? We're a motley little crew, up against Sanballat and Tobiah and the surrounding Arab nations. What were we thinking? We have overreached. And the visions of glory began to fade into a mirage. They thought to themselves, you know what? This is a larger job than we thought. And it's harder work than we anticipated. And they began to get discouraged and thought about handing in their resignation. Folks, fatigue will push you in that direction, and frustration will put you in that direction. You've got to, when you set out to do something in life, you've got to sign up for the fact that it's going to take time and toil, and therefore build into your regiment times to regain your energy and refocus your mind. And when you set out to do something in life, understand that part of getting to the finish line and enjoying the party and the band and the hoopla that comes with the victory, part of getting there is putting up with frustration along the way. In fact, as I thought about this, I went in 3 directions. You want to write these down and think about them. I enjoyed this study, and as I've preached this message, others have enjoyed it also. Number 1, as we look at the feeling of frustration, there's so much rubbish. I want you to write this down. Rubble removing is necessary. Okay, if you're going to build something, you're going to have to clean and clear the construction site. These people needed to be reminded of that fact. Of course there was much rubbish. It was there the day they started. But you see, now they're tired. Everything seems bigger than it really is. Or they have forgot why they started in the first place and lost sight of the greatness of God's grace to help them be victorious. But just, you and I need to be aware of the fact that if you're going to build something, you're going to have to be willing to remove some rubbish. You're going to have to roll up your sleeves and get dirty. Building a business, a marriage, or doing a work for God will involve an element of rubbish removing. Our lives and our churches, folks, are littered with junk that needs to be removed. There are things that have run their course in life and in ministry and whatever, and it just needs to be set aside and a new thing done. It needs to be given up, it needs to be thrown out, and a new plan needs to be devised. There are things in our lives that should never have been there in the first place. There are things in our ministry that should never have been there in the first place, and they need to be tossed. Rubbish needs to be removed if victory and advance is to be known. Things stand in the way of progress. And you and I just need to nail that down. Don't get frustrated with it as if, wow, what's that brick doing there? What do you mean, what's it doing there? The walls have fallen down. And we've got to build it back up, or we've got to remove that and go and get a new brick. Okay? If you want a better marriage, you've got to look at the stuff that's standing in the way and remove it. And don't wait for somebody else to remove it. You remove it on your side. If we want to build a better ministry, if we want to do a greater work for God, we've got to constantly look at how we're doing a thing or why we're doing a thing. Has a thing run its course? Should it have never been there in the first place? Should it be replaced? Does it need to be removed and replaced?
It's wise to examine what we're doing and why. You're listening to Know the Truth with our teacher, Philip DeCourcy. Today's message is the first in our series called Down But Not Out. Look, there are times when we feel like the proverbial boxer in the ring. Outside forces tend to take swings at us. Sometimes it's a critic who tries to knock us out. Other times it's a mistake of our own. Whatever the case, the Christian life can be brutal at times. As a help to you, Philip is recommending a new book that he's enjoyed. It's written by a colleague in pastoral ministry, Robert Jeffress. The title of the book is Courageous, 10 Strategies for Thriving in a Hostile World. When times are tough and we can feel the punishing blows from those who don't share our Christian values, it's easy to slip into survival mode, just trying to keep standing. But the life God has called us to live is so much more. We want you to read this new and relevant book. Again, it's called Courageous, 10 Strategies for Thriving in a Hostile World. And it's yours when you give a generous gift to support the ministry of Know the Truth. Just mention the one word, courageous, when you call 888-644-8811 or visit ktt.org. And if you're new to Know the Truth, we'd like to welcome you with an absolutely free resource. It's the Kings and Prophets Timeline from Rose Publishing. Sometimes it is confusing to keep track of all of Israel's key figures in the Old Testament, but this pamphlet puts all this information at your fingertips, and the pamphlet will easily fit into the cover of your Bible. Ask for the Kings and Prophets Timeline by calling 888-644-8811. I'm Wayne Shepherd, inviting you back tomorrow when Philip DeCourcy continues his message called Down But Not Out. That's Tuesday on Know the Truth. Today's program was produced and sponsored by Know the Truth Incorporated. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."